I'm Beccy Speight. I'm the Chief Executive of the RSPB, the Royal Society for the Protection of Birds. And we have a very timely panel discussion this morning, which is really about if we had the opportunity to make sure the incoming government, we've got the election next week, did the right thing for farming, nature, people and farmers in the first 100 days, what would that be? So we've got some great people here on the panel to give us their thoughts, and then we'll open it up and have a bit of our Q&A with the audience as well. I don't know, probably most of you were either camping or drinking beer last night, but I did watch the final leaders debate, and I can tell you that farming and the environment did not feature. So we've got our work cut out in terms of making our influence felt, I think, with whoever is successful in forming the next government. So the RSPB, we've been involved in quite a lot of nature-based farming over the years. We have our own Hope Farm in Cambridgeshire, and then we work a lot with farming tenants and graziers to deliver our mission around nature. And we've also had a lot to do with trying to influence farming policy over the years as well. And as we know, here in England, we've got elms, whatever you may think of it, in place, and the next government will inherit that as a policy. So there's a lot of food and farming policy, I think, that's up in the air at the moment, lots of challenges and opportunities, and we're going to have to kind of put our backs into shaping that agenda going forward. So, as I said, it's a week before the polls, a week before the final election. We've got a lot of polls coming through, and we've kind of got some big issues, I think, like health, the economy, a thriving farming industry, to really kind of think about how we play into that agenda. And what I'm interested in is what are the real priority areas where we want to see action early on, and I'm hoping our panel is going to give us some food for thought on that. So just to introduce the panel, starting at the far end, we've got Anthony Curwen, who's an estate manager from Kent. I think more than 2,000 acres, Anthony. A lot of it kind of in sort of various arable forms, and then you've got some rough grazing as well, I think, and some of it in stewardship too. So it'll be interesting to hear your thoughts. And then next to Anthony, we've got Gavin, who's the Deputy President for the CLA, but also a farmer in Kent.
I know, Norfolk.
Oh, Norfolk, sorry. And Ed's, Kent's lovely, but Norfolk's and is doing a lot of kind of arable farming there, I think. And then next to Gavin, we've got Holly, who is a tenant farmer, but has worked for the Wildlife Trust, worked for the National Trust in the past. And I think it's really, interestingly, on 200 acres, I think, isn't it, Holly, trying to kind of create that sort of climate resilience going forward on that piece of land. So I hope we're going to hear more about that later on. And then next to Holly, we've got Harry Bowell, who is a director for the National Trust with particular responsibility for land and nature. Harry's had a career working for RSPB, the Wildlife Trusts, and now National Trust, and I think is very well versed in his experience of working alongside farming to try and achieve some of the aims of those organisations. So we have some food for thought coming up. And I guess the question I want to ask you all to answer in around about 2 minutes is, imagine I am one of the Steves, Steve Barclay or Steve Reed, and imagine you've got the chance to really influence my thinking about what should happen in that first 100 days to really push forward the agenda around farming and nature. What absolutely needs to happen in that first 3 months? Okay, so Anthony, I am going to turn to you first.
Okay, first 100 days in 2 minutes. Just because I like the Sustainable Farming Initiative, I like ELMS, the England version. It's kick-starting regenerative farming and taking the whole industry down a certain direction. And whichever government is in power, I do hope, I'm making an assumption here, but just because another party has that idea doesn't mean it's a bad idea. Let's make it work. Let's kickstart sustainable farming initiatives, because actually, the estate I work on, we can get more money than BPS and deliver for farming, the environment, and reduce our carbon footprint and for biodiversity. It needs measuring, of course it does, but let's do it. And the second point, I've got 2 minutes, the second point, and it's a really important one, having supplied major multiples, the supermarket chain, when I grew a lot of vegetables, we've got to have an ombudsman with teeth, because that is doing a lot of the current practices. It's unfair in the farming industry, and the current practices actually are creating problems for the environment, massive wastage, ridiculous situations with supply chains and pricing, which causes shortages, or they need full shelves, and the only way you get that is through having waste. And we need a proper, fair ombudsman, because that will help deliver for nature-friendly farming, but it'll also help deliver proper, it'll help food security, because at the moment it's a nonsense, and they're getting away with bad practice. And they're all getting away with bad practice because they can. If there's a set, they'd all have to behave, they wouldn't have to do it because their competitor is. So that's the other thing I'd really, really want to see, an ombudsman with real teeth, to deliver proper marketing in our supply chain.
Okay, so you're saying popular response there. You're saying stick with elms.
Yeah.
Like it.
Improve it.
But
deliver it. Maybe more finance it. But
Yeah.
don't throw it out because someone else had the idea.
Yeah. Okay, and then get this ombudsman with teeth. To
Real
make a
teeth.
difference in terms of sort of supply chain fairness, etc.
Because Henry Dimbleby described it as our weird system in this country.
Okay.
And he wrote the food strategy.
That's really clear. Thank you. And in under 2 minutes. Brilliant.
There you go.
All right. I'm going to mix it up now. Can you bear it? Holly, I'd like to hear from you.
I've got 2 key asks. One is more of a higher level. We need a land use framework installed. Land is a finite resource, which is not at the moment being balanced. We have ENGOs calling for more space for nature, and we have farming organisations calling for food security. But we still don't seem to be grappling that we need both on the same land. And we have multiple examples of that being delivered. So we need to change the way we're thinking. I attended a talk with Steve Barclay, and he didn't mention the environment or climate change once in food security. This is where we need to be changing the thinking. So we need a collaborative land use framework to be installed in the first 100 days so that we can work as a community to rebuild positive land use. And then the other side is we've currently got an underspend in DEFRA. So how are we going to use that money? My call is for higher tier to be processed efficiently. The excuse is that there's a lack of advisors. That, we have systems in place that should be able to mean that we can get up to 3,000 agreements through a year. At the moment, on Exmoor, where I farm, higher tier are absolutely essential part of our farm income and for long-term planning on the farm. So we have a higher tier agreement with wood pasture and species-rich grassland. And without that, we wouldn't be able to deliver for nature in the way we are. So it's absolutely essential that we are pushing more higher tier agreements through.
Great. So I'm taking it that you're sort of agreeing with Anthony on elms, but you're being more specific about where you want to see the improvement, which is around high tier. Yeah? Okay, and then your land use framework, that's about basically, this has been promised, hasn't it, for a long time, kind of hasn't emerged. Yeah. So you're saying that is an absolute priority to get in place because we need to balance all these different needs of land and farming.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, great, thank you. Gavin.
Well, following on from both of these very good points that have been made, first of all, I'm taking it that whichever government comes in is not going to start hacking elms to death, because I think that would be a massive mistake. I hope elms carries on and that we get some stability there. But I think what always amazes me is that governments refuse to learn from their failures and learn from their successes. And for instance, we still don't have any measurement system really in place at even a basic level. So I would like to see SFI produce a natural capital baseline assessment, so at least we all know where we're starting from. And if ever there was a failure within the entry-level scheme, those people that remember that, they got 70% of farmers uptaking it, but nobody ever measured anything, and finally it sort of fell apart because it didn't actually achieve very much. So I'd like to see measurement. And then the other thing I'd really like to see is collaboration. I think that there's so much more that SFI could incentivize for farmers to get together other than simply through landscape recovery or some of the bigger schemes. There should be an ability to pay slightly increased payment rates for farmers gathering together to produce wildlife corridors or riparian strips or whatever it is. So those are the two main asks that I'd like to see, but it's learning what work, when things work is keeping them working, and when things fail is learning from those mistakes. And actually going on from that, FIPL, those in the audience that have been involved in FIPL's an amazing scheme of where things have really, really worked and produced very, very good results on the ground. And I don't understand why FIPL's now being talked about as being cut off, but I'd really, that's, it's just trying to get governments to not be competitive with each other, but to learn from their mistakes and learn from their successes.
Great. That's a really clear message about basically getting measurement in place around natural capital and using that to set proper baselines around SFI, ELMS, et cetera, and then you're saying more collaboration, and you were saying at the SFI level, so not just a kind of landscape recovery, those other tiers.
Yeah, it shouldn't be that farmers have to enter landscape recovery to actually be able to collaborate, because we've got the clusters out there. They've got to be incentivized to produce wildlife corridors.
Yeah. Okay, that's really clear. And then a big vote for FIPL. You're saying FIPL's work, let's keep it. Yeah. Okay, great. And last but by no means least, Harry.
So the horrible thing about going last is that everyone said everything I've got written down here. And Beccy used to be my boss, and I'm terrified of her in many, many ways. And I will try and keep to the brief and to 2 minutes. So probably, therefore, maybe an underscoring, particularly we've been thinking about both the what and the how of 100 days. So just to underscore Holly's point about higher level, I think everyone in this tent wants to do more, and whilst there's been a really sensible focus on getting bums on seats through the schemes, we still think there's really undone business around the higher level schemes, so I really want to see that. And then just to echo also, Holly, we should be one person really, it would have saved on the mics, the need for a land use framework, and that's got to go beyond the sort of quite simplistic notion of food security. It's got to think about food resilience. It's got to think about climate. It's got to think about recovering nature, and it's also got to think about water from the natural environment. But also, it's got to be tied in with need for housing, need for energy, all that other stuff. So, if those are the two whats we want to focus on, I think the how is going to be, if not equally, if not more important. So just to echo the point of let's not have a whole load of reinvention, whatever the colour of the new government. We've got some brilliant bones in place, and now what we need to focus on is enacting that. And I was in a talk yesterday where someone obviously reminded me that farming works on at least a 7-year planning cycle, which transcends parliamentary cycles. Yeah. So there's something about the continuity and drumbeat and just getting on with stuff. And when you were my terrifying boss, Beccy, you used to talk about good old leadership grip. So there's something about just gripping it and taking action. And then the second point about the how is that we know public money is going to be really tight, but there is still a lot of public money around. We live in a world where we spend as much on prescribing metformin through the NHS as we do on agricultural support. So there's something about government finds it notoriously difficult to join up. But there is something about seizing the requirement of the day to get more joined up. And perhaps the easiest place to start, because a lot of the levers of it are in DEFRA, is in the water environment. So how'd I do?
Not bad.
All right, thanks.
Right, so that's all very lovely. Thanks very much for your thoughts on what I should do in my first 100 days. Cheeky bunch. I tell you what, I've got some pressing issues, and I'm interested in what you think about the pressing issues I've got coming into power here. So the first pressing issue is, God blimey, the only thing that came up in all of the kind of pre-election run-up was blinking sewage in water and what we're going to do about water. So I don't know if you can help me at all with that and whether you think that's a priority at all. I'm also really concerned about sort of food security issues in the short term. So I know we had all this kind of flooding that went on, earlier over the winter, and I heard a lot from farmers saying that that was going to really impact on food supply and food prices later on this year. I'm coming into power, and I'm a bit worried about what's going to go on around that. So I don't know if you've got anything to say to me about food and food security. And then the last thing I just wanted to ask you about was just this whole idea of a land use framework, which a couple of you have mentioned. I mean, I'm really keen to get lots more kind of housing in, energy infrastructure. Obviously, we've got to keep producing food. So I'm really interested in how you think that land use framework is going to help us deal with all of that. So those are my 3 pressing issues, which I'd kind of like to hear from you on, really, in terms of that first 100 days. So water, somebody brought up water in our little conversation. So Harry, did you bring up water?
I did.
Yeah. So just talk to me about farming and water then in this first 100 days, because that felt like a pressing environmental kind of issue out there.
So the focus has been, or the noise probably in Steve Plural's ears, has been about CSOs and sewage. But we know that the water system is more complex than that. So perhaps politically, it's sensible to start with that because we know that's in the public mind. But we need to have a more holistic approach to the totality of water. So it's not just, we know that it's not just CSOs in urban areas that are leading to degradation of water. So focusing on that specifically, whilst there's a lot to do, I think looking at the regulator, thinking about the regulator having more of a mandate more than just price of water, actually giving it proper teeth around the environment feels like a good starting point. But singly focusing on CSOs won't tackle the issue, is what I would say to the Steves.
So you think there's something to be done around farming then?
I think there's something to be done around farming, around diffuse pollution, and matching. We know that the schemes can do a lot for that. We know that putting margins around water courses, et cetera, proof in the pudding, further up the catchment. I mean, at the moment, we're looking at absolutely the end of the pipe. But we know that land use and what happens with land use is absolutely fundamental to what happens downstream. So really intelligent use of schemes, really incentivising the water environment and water retention. So the kind of farming that we're talking about here, that whole thing of stewarding water, rather than just having our farms pouring water down into water courses, feels pretty fundamental.
Yeah.
So a more holistic view than just CSOs.
And what about regulation?
Yes, please. So at the moment, the regulator is primarily focused on price. Lots of conversation yesterday, I think, in the great conversation between Henry Dimbleby and Andy Catto, we were talking about the externalities, the true cost of these things. So regulation, which is looking at the totality of the water system, not just price to the consumer, feels like something that feels pretty fundamental.
Okay. Yeah.
So I just want to jump in on the water.
Yes.
I think it's really important as farmers that we're starting to really see the way water is travelling across our landscape and how we need to build better resilient farming systems and how that's tied into schemes. And I think I'm going to jump on the FIPL championing, because FIPL for us has been absolutely vital in the way we've re-looked at water travelling across our farm and how we can store it in the winter when it's coming down and then utilising it essentially for our summer grazing. Because at the moment, I don't think we're seeing how essential water is, and as the climate's changing, how important it is that we capture that and store it. And then the wider community benefit, like you say, and accepting responsibility as farmers Our farm's on a regenerative agroecological course, but we need to accept how we farm, how that impacts that wider community and the water quality.
Okay. And I'm interested that none of you told me that we needed more money. So I'm assuming that you think we've got enough money.
Massive assumption there, Chair. The industry will need more money to deliver. There's no question of that. To deliver the level we want to deliver, coupled with the measurement that's been mentioned, because we have committed internationally to certain standards. And we need to be able to deliver, and farming can deliver that, but we need to have more money and more smoother transition of what we're doing. So yeah, more money's needed, please. Though I know because you're not going to probably give it to us because you're in government.
And if there isn't any more money, what don't I get?
Well, without much money, you can change the planning system so that it makes it easier for people who are getting grants for diffuse pollution to put in slurry stores to try and prevent diffuse pollution, and those putting in reservoirs. You can have a planning system which speeds up the ability for them to access that grant money and then put those facilities onto farm. Because right at the moment, I'd say actually the money's not good enough at 40% for these grants. For a lot of small farmers, that's simply not enough. They've had to deal with the cost inflation within their own businesses, which means that they haven't got a lot of spare cash around to put into new slurry storage or reservoirs. They're being held back by planning as well. So you could up the rate at which they're financed, and you could make the planning a lot more simple for them.
I'm sensing a bit of dissent here, maybe.
No dissent.
Oh.
Sorry.
Dissent at a round table is always good for me.
It is. What I would say is that what you don't get, or I'd say what you do get, is you get costs emerging elsewhere.
Okay.
So if you don't invest in this, the costs bubble up elsewhere. They bubble up in the health system, they bubble up in the water environment. So other parts of government, rather perversely, pick up the cost of not investing here, and there's a lot of evidence to suggest that this is really good value for money.
Can I just jump? We shouldn't lose sight of the fact that as farmers we're producing food, and that is my aim, is to produce nutrient-dense food. So if we don't have that support to produce that, like you say, cross-departmentally, there's going to be costs. And it's about, as an industry, saying we can produce really good quality food that creates a healthy population, but not if we're not funded.
And you will see the death of the family farm if you go too hard on regulation. I mean, that's up to you as a government, but that's what will happen. Because if people are just regulated out of business, that seems to me completely counterproductive.
So you're not keen on regulation?
No, I'm keen on regulation to a degree, but if it's not backed up by, you've got to have a certain amount of carrot with the stick. And if the carrot isn't working, the carrot has to be working before you start putting the stick in.
Yeah. What about this land use framework idea then? It's very hard to do, and that's why, it hasn't happened yet. It's very complicated. It's a bit kind of pie in the sky. At the moment, we're kind of managing to do lots of things. I don't see why we need this land use framework that some of you think is so important.
You absolutely do. In the southeast, there's a lot of building going on, a lot of it on top quality farmland, which is really concerning, because if we're going to produce food, hopefully in a regenerative way, we've got to really watch this out. Now, some of the housing is needed, some is not. There's no framework. There's solar panel farms going in the wrong places because there's no proper framework to understand what's going on. And there's so much demand for land and then we've got to get it also, please, get with this nonsense, it's nature or farming, it's actually both. So please stop the people telling you it's nature or farming, because it's not, it's both. We work together. But yes, so framework is important. I know the last Secretary of State for Levelling Up, I think, promised it for 3 years and never delivered. So, yeah, deliver, please, because it's important. Then we all know where we're going.
Okay, so we've talked a bit about the short term, and I still feel a bit unconvinced about the kind of food thing in the short term. But let's move on to the longer term then. I'm really interested, as I sit here and I think, well, hopefully we've got 2 terms, let's say. So in 10 years' time, how is farming going to look in 10 years' time, do you think, if the right things come to pass, or indeed if the wrong things come to pass? Where do you think it's going?
Well, if you're not measuring it, how do you know?
So just get measuring and that will...
Well, to start with, I think you've got to have some form of baseline, whatever you do, because otherwise you've got no idea where you're going to be in 10 years' time. And that will change over time.
But you're a farmer. Where do you think it's going to be in 10 years' time?
I think what I'm seeing overall around the country is much more of an understanding of what sustainable means. And I think that farmers everywhere are getting the gist of the fact that they have to be, as we've talked about, climate resilient, they have to be economically resilient, they have to be environmentally resilient, and they can only do that if they change their practices. But as we've talked about, farming life cycles are so massive, and it's so long term, a lot of the decision making, that we have to accept that some of this is, somebody said the other day, it has to be done with scalpels rather than sledgehammers. The incremental movements are quite slow, but I think, we should be, in 10 years' time, we should be seeing a much more diverse set of farm businesses, which will include an awful lot more environmental delivery.
Okay, anyone disagree with that or feel they want to add some more nuance to that? 10 years.
I suppose it's just building on what we've already spoken about, but it's just building a fair and just food system that is feeding everybody. So Labour, who potentially will be getting in, they talk about cutting red tape, but what do they actually mean practically? Because from our experience, if we're talking about getting good food into the people that need it, so schools and hospitals, we need a process in place that is not onerous on the producer so that we can deliver food to our local communities really easily. At the moment, that is not possible for me as a farmer. I have to go through a county council process, which is long, and I'm just not going to do it, essentially. But we could produce a food system that works for everyone better.
Okay, so something measured, something that's more tied in perhaps to local communities and populations. Okay, what else is going to be different?
The understanding that food security goes before the farm. So 2.5 million acres worth of food are imported to feed our livestock industry. So therefore, most of our fertilizer is produced overseas. So if you're talking about food security, you've got to look at the inputs, and that's where regen comes in because it's more circular. So that's got to be thought of. If we don't get this right, we'll end up importing food, there'll be less production at home, and we'll be exporting our pollution, we'll be exporting our animal welfare, exporting our carbon, because this net zero, frankly, it should be consumptive, not territorial. So actually, the government might do better by doing that. So don't do that, please. And so it is important to realise that if we don't get this right, we'll hurt the whole industry, hurt society, and not do anything for the environment either.
Okay.
Just add two things for me. So I think in 10 years' time, I really hope that Dimbleby's 3-compartment idea is really in play. And what stems from that is that nature has stopped declining, and then we've got a more resilient set of landscapes to what's coming in terms of changing climate. And then for those that were in the tent listening to Andy Catto last night, he was asked exactly that question, and I've got too much cider and too much of a late night to remember exactly what he said, but it's worth listening to because that is the future that I would love to see come to bear.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, you're kind of convincing. But
see why I don't work for you.
I'm interested in questions from the floor now. Both around this kind of, 100 days thing, what are the immediate priorities, and then this kind of longer term direction. So we've got a couple of roving mics, and what I'm going to ask you to do is to make sure you ask a question. I don't want a speech, I want a question, and I want it to be kind of, fairly brief so that we've got time to kind of really hear from panelists. So who's got their hands up, sorry?
I've even got a microphone.
Oh, well done.
Thank you very much. I'd like to challenge a little bit more on your panel, saying they'd like a land use framework. What they're saying is they want somebody to come down the drive and tell all of us what we're allowed to do on our farms. That seems quite a dangerous ideological position to me, because it takes it out of our hands what we're allowed to do. If I choose to plant a wood, That's up to me,
So
not
what's your
up to
question?
somebody else.
What's
So
your question?
I need to challenge them. They say they want a land use framework.
Do they really want it?
Do they really want it?
So I'm just going to jump straight in there. When I talk about a land use framework, that is a collaborative piece of work that is with the farming voice. I am a farmer and I believe that we should be championing farmers' voices and respecting them because we hold a lot of knowledge and sometimes that knowledge is really appropriate in a local area. So like you say, what you choose to do with your land might be appropriate for that point, and that's what it's about. It's about a collaborative community build. It's not something that's delivered only at the top.
Anyone else want to come in and defend
Well,
it?
I'd sort of agree with the question or either statement. I mean, I remember my grandfather telling me about Dig for Victory and what Dig for Victory actually meant on the ground. And it meant an awful lot of people with clipboards turning up on your farm saying, you haven't put the drill in deep enough, you haven't done this, you haven't done that. And everyone talks about Dig for Victory with these rose-tinted glasses like it was the most amazing thing ever. But for the farmers on the ground, it was really, really hard work and very, very divisive and pitted farmers against each other, pitted farmers against government. It just didn't do what it was meant to do. So if we have a land use framework or any sort of prescriptive top-down sort of thing, I'm pretty against it. I think it could work potentially as a bottom-up idea, but then I don't know, in terms of the length of time it's going to take to get anything meaningful created, I have my doubts.
Okay, well, I obviously came from a different perspective. I didn't envisage, and a very fair point made there, I didn't envisage to tell farmers what they can do. I was envisaging large-scale development, which I have seen in my area near Margate, which is not telling farmers what to do. It's saying your 500-acre housing estates actually ought to be part of a land. Do we really need it there? And is that the best need for the country? So I'm not trying to sell on small scale. It's not what I envisaged by saying a land use strategy. I think the worst thing of all would be people going down with clipboards saying you can't pass the wood. So that was not my, but I take your point. If it's done in the wrong way, that could be a result. In that case, no, I would not support it. So it's for large-scale developments, which I would want the land use strategy.
Can I, sorry, jumping ahead of you, Harry.
Okay.
And just to add, one of the reasons as a farmer I would like a land use framework is there is a call within some sectors of our society. I am a livestock farmer, I produce protein, I produce meat. And there is a call in some sectors that is threatening that industry with a call to turn land, which I am currently farming and producing food on, to be solely for nature. So that is why I would like a wider thought out process.
Yeah.
No, that's a very good point. It's a very fair point. Let's move on to something else. Chap with a beard back here. Sorry.
It's sort of part of that. It's slightly part of that point. It's sort of going backwards. He who pays you controls you. He's brought your work. With the subsidies that we had with Common Agricultural Policy, because we were paid in those subsidies and we were on that teat for a long, long time, regenerative agriculture could have happened 30 years ago. And the byproduct of that, I would say, is what's pushed that back. We have that window now, which is why this exists. And everyone needs to remember going forwards that, yes, where that money comes from, you're getting paid for something and you give control in exchange for that financial support, whether that's conservation or building or food production.
Yeah.
So we need to split them up so we maintain our independence and control and to survive in our principles as well as...
And what's your question? What's your question?
How are we going to guarantee that we have separate income streams that are independent? It's not just a tied-in one payment that is going to give all the control to one organisation in DEFRA.
Okay. So that's the idea about kind of how I think Elms is going to work and how it works. Yeah, and kind of how we kind of make sure that we don't cede too much control, basically.
Yeah, I don't want just the RPA controlling all of my payments and come down and
Yep.
dictate to me.
Yeah.
Wow.
Wow.
I think we will obviously know that we'll see private finance come into the market. That will bring its own challenges, I'm sure, but that will probably deal with some of that. I'm not too worried about, I accept what we've talked about, that we want to talk about multifunctionality in land use, and it's really important that we don't get siloed, and maybe against the question a bit, but that we don't end up thinking that this land needs to be used for this or this land needs to be used for that, because I think as tech increases, we will see multifunctionality of land use increase dramatically, and we'll be having grazing cows under solar panels, wheat in one corner of the field, whatever it is, but that will only increase over time.
Yeah. Did you want to come in, Anthony?
I was trying to unpick that question a bit.
Yeah. I think it's partly about control.
I think, farmers are being controlled since subsidies existed. And what we don't understand, we should have understood, is the direct subsidy actually doesn't benefit the farmer because it washes through the business. It benefits because the marketplace, we're tiny people in the marketplace, you have massive suppliers, you have massive buyers, and if you put direct subsidies in, you actually, the suppliers charge more, the buyers pay less, and that is well researched, that's OECD type stuff. So the subsidy going towards kickstarting regenerative farming, which is delinked from the BPS type payments, there's got to be a bit of control. I take your point, but if we're going to kickstart it like they kickstarted renewables, energy, this kickstarting, because you'll find regenerative farming, actually, if we get it right, will actually begin to become profitable without so much support. I shouldn't be telling that as a minister, because you don't want to hear that.
I've stopped being a minister now.
Oh, stop being a minister now. Thank you. You're being okay.
But okay. Let's go over here. Yes.
Hi. Do you think there should be a regulatory framework for human health and nutrition? Because after all, farming is about that.
Oh, good question. This is about farming, food, and health, and whether we should kind of have a framework for it, basically. Yeah.
Food.
Yeah.
Like processed foods, who's controlling that? It's all very well us doing a great job, but it looks like big business, big ag is going to take over the benefits of that and carry on doing as they please.
Wow, I'm sorry.
Terrific.
We're talking about health. Right, who wants to have a go at that one?
I'll have a stab or a start. So Henry Dimbleby last night was talking about there are two parts to the equation around the food system. One is the environmental footprint and everything we know that flows from that, and the other is the nutrition and health. And he was making the point that largely, probably through some of the environmental legislation, the environmental stuff is at least partially set up. I might take slight issue about how much action has been taken on it, but I think the point he made was good. He said the other half of his recommendations have not been implemented. So back to what we might call on with government is dust down the totality of that work, which was pretty seminal, and took a very rounded view to the food system, not just the environmental footprint, the consequence on farmers, but actually also looked at the nutritional issues. So I suppose we would say go back to that work and look at the totality. But of course, it's not all within, hence back to the need for more join up across government. That is cross-sectoral. So there's something particularly about, is Wes Streeting and whoever his opposite number in the Conservative Party, are they thinking about how they embed that into health?
Yeah. Who's read that Henry Dimbleby food strategy? Yeah, quite a lot of people. And who liked it? Who's read it? Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Right, moving on. I can't see where the mics are. Yep.
So we're talking about frameworks, nature recovery and health and what have you, which are all obviously massively vital. But as a first generation farmer myself, I think one thing everyone's missing, and I'd be interested to know your thoughts on it, is we can have a golden model for every single thing you're talking about. If we don't get more new entrants in, what's the point? Because there's no one to operate those models.
Yeah.
And we hear a lot about the family farm and what have you, but there's very little talk a lot of the time about new entrants and access to land. And a byproduct of these nature, the natural funding and improving nature, which I'm all for massively on our farm. On Dartmoor, we're seeing big companies coming in, buying up hundreds of acres without even viewing it, and just blanket planting it.
Yeah.
So that's also blocking the new entrants out. So yeah, the question is, what are your thoughts on new entrants and getting people in to actually operate these systems going forward?
Yeah. A popular question, new entrants, lifeblood, what do we do?
Okay, Holly must answer this as well, but I've just chaired a session about new entrants to farming. So this is, and it was hosted by the NFFN, Nature Friendly Farming Network, that Holly and I are both part of, and we're both part on that session. New entrants are absolutely essential. And the biggest danger I always think of farming is not everything else going on, it's insularity. Unless we get new blood and new ideas and new people coming through, one of the biggest problems we're going to get is our industry will die. I am, my age, I'm in the 67% of the age of farmers over their 60 in this country. We need new entrants, we need it desperately. How do we do that? It's easy to say what we need, but we've got as an industry, we've got to start larger landowners, see how we can get younger people involved. Because if you want your industry to carry on, we've got not to do it to our sons and daughters. We've actually got to get new people in and help new people do things. So I'd also like to see government, though, to incentivise. Maybe change the tax laws or something so it becomes trading income for new entrants rather than seen as an investment as part of your tax purpose. But new entrants, completely right. We've got to, let's get a task force to look at how we do this with, again, let's have a cross-party task force to see how we get new entrants into farming. Because without it, we're dead. We want biodiversity, we need diversity in our industry too.
Holly, can you feel my gaze resting on you?
I don't have all the answers, and I struggle with the same thing around the financialisation of land and the mass buying up of land. And as a tenant farmer, this is something that's really tricky. On an agricultural wage, we do not have the ability to buy land. And I hate that about our industry. I think rents need to be realistic. I'm a National Trust tenant, and I would say we've built a very good relationship with them. We've been really open and honest. So I think we need to be more open and honest as an industry. How do we stop greenwashing and industries buying land? I think in a piece of work that I'm working on through a role with the Wildlife Trust, is that they have the money. So let's look at, again, we're not just planting trees. Let's look at how we can produce food and still deliver those beneficial environmental outcomes. So let's look at how we can holistically farm that land still, not just separate it and say, right, we've planted some trees. On possibly really species-rich grassland, a case on Dartmoor that I'm aware of, that's just not appropriate.
Okay, yeah, Gavin.
I mean, obviously, I represent an organisation which has quite a lot of landowners within it, and a lot of those never want to farm. They don't have the expertise to farm in hand, so they need their lifeblood, the whole continuity of their estate is to do with bringing in new entrants. Otherwise, they don't have a business. I hope we can have a grown-up conversation about tenure. Over the next few years. I do think that there is an issue with some of the tenure in terms of the fact that it keeps people in, that we have various tenants who are effectively in their farms because they're in a farmhouse, which they can't be, that they don't want to lose for obvious reasons, because they haven't got anywhere necessarily to live. They perhaps haven't built up a pension or money to enable them to move out of those houses, and yet they're effectively in the farm as it is farming technically, but really farming to stay in their houses. And I think we need to have a grown-up conversation about those AHA tenancies that are where we've got elderly people within AHA tenancies. We need to develop FBTs so that they take into account all the ELMS issues that we've got, and we need to look at more share farming options, more contract farming options, because there may be a situation where you move away from just one tenant on one piece of land. You might have 3 or 4 people doing 3 or 4 different things on one piece of land that all have different rights to be able to do that. And I mean, that's for another conversation, but it's those sorts of ideas that need to be discussed.
Yep. And Harry?
Just to pull on that thread a little bit more, I think we've got a sort of 20th century set of instruments, which I'm not sure are fit for purpose for some of our 21st century needs. And in particular, the need to bring capital to a tenancy. Those kind of things are really, really difficult if you're a Holly of this world, or a lot of the young people in this audience. So I think it's incumbent upon institutional landowners like the National Trust to really think, what is the basis of those models? How can we think differently about it? How can we share the risk? Maybe how we can move away from some of our thinking around landlord and tenant, because the future is in this place, and the fact that probably the average age of this audience is half the average age of farming. So they are the future.
Yeah. Okay. Yes, and then I'm coming back this way.
Hi, Ben Reynolds from the think tank IEP UK. So Labour have indicated that they want a closer relationship with the EU, particularly on trade, and I'd be interested in the panel's views on what implications that might have for food and farming standards, what opportunities that might pose, what risks that might pose.
Very clear question. Trade and potentially closer relationship with the EU.
Okay. Everyone's scared about talking about it, aren't they? They shouldn't be. We've absolutely got to get it. We want growth in the economy, and we're just making life a nightmare. I know people who used to deal where I am in Kent, of course, do backloading all the lorries to Europe. Doesn't happen anymore because the paperwork is ridiculous. There's businesses stopped trading with Europe, countless businesses, SMEs, because of the ridiculous situation. So, of course, we need to improve that. We've got to realign with the EU. It's going to be politically very difficult, and when you do anything, you've got to take people with you. But we've got to do that. So it's essential if we want to. And food standards, I think you'll find you now have your own food standards to be greater than the EU, but let's at least follow their standards, because that'll help trade. So yeah, I'm with those. I don't know answers all your questions, Ben, but I hope it answers some of them, because yeah, we've got to improve. And again, the environmental improvement and everything else is not just about Britain, is it? Nature knows no boundaries, biodiversity knows no boundaries, carbon knows no boundaries. We've got to do it, and if there's a greater standard in Europe, let's align with that and go forward.
I mean, I totally agree. Yeah. I mean, I think the present situation with trade with Europe is untenable. I think most of the supply chain would agree with that as well. There are vast warehouses in Northern Ireland full of paperwork, which all has to be done to go through the red line into Northern Ireland before you even start talking about further afield. I mean, it's totally crazy, and so somebody will have to readdress it at some point.
Yeah.
The only addition I would make is I don't think the future is the kind of trade agreement that we struck with Australia in terms of future of the kind of farming we want to see.
Yeah, so get the trade deals right.
Yeah.
I feel like everyone said everything.
Okay, great. I'm coming over this side. I can see someone waving right over in that far corner. Sorry to send you sprinting over there.
Hi there. What should an incoming government do to ensure we grow far more fruit and vegetables? And when I say grow them, I mean grow them in a good way.
Fruit and veg.
From a personal point of view, I'd like to see a return to a protein premium. I'd like to see more homegrown protein in terms of peas and beans, particularly. But I think you're right. I mean, we are totally under resourced, or we produce far less than we really need to in fruit and veg, and trying to incentivize people to stick within the fruit and veg industry is really hard, let alone getting new people to come in. So yeah, I totally agree with you. But from a personal point of view, the first thing I'd want to see is a protein premium.
As a supplier, historically, to supermarkets directly with cauliflowers and potatoes. Now, why did I mention that? Because if you look at self-sufficiency, we're pretty good on cereals, we're pretty good on dairy produce, we're very good on lamb. Our actual shortages of self-sufficiency, if you like, is fruit and veg, which has been exported overseas because of my point I made earlier, because of supermarket practice. They killed us because they didn't have supply and demand. So therefore, they wanted massive supplies with farms all over Europe, and it became a major problem. What the answers are, because we've got a massive mammoth to tackle now. So somehow we've got the biggest cause was the marketplace and the buying power of the supermarkets, which then started getting overseas. I could bring a wagon in of cauliflowers from Spain the same I could get it up to the factory in the Midlands. It was ridiculous. We went out of business because of the unfair practices. And I think that is part of the problem, but it's very hard for government to get involved and do things, but it's got to start addressing this because it's really important, and especially what you're saying about the right ways. But the right ways is actually to put criteria in what is required on home-produced food and really incentivize it if we can. And it's not just monetary ways, it's incentivize it to all sorts of ways. I know that everybody hasn't answered the question, but because we don't have supply and demand, the hot day yesterday, it would have been normally with salads, the price of salads has gone through the roof, price of vegetables through the floor. Now, it wouldn't happen because the price is decided months and months in advance. So the veg grower, who wouldn't sell anything yesterday, would get a phone call, we used to get them, don't want them, so you threw them away. And I know that's not answering this question directly, but that's what caused we need massive global corporations where we can actually afford to take those risks, which individual farmers can't. So, yeah, we need, again, I'd like a cross-party think tank, if you like, or call it what you will, to examine how we deal with this, because it's a real issue. We need more fruit and veg grown the right way in this country.
Holly, yeah.
I want to jump in around localised food systems. I don't think we should be afraid of growing veg and fruit in a small farming way. Small farmers feed huge majority of the world. So we don't need to be in an industrialized food system to feed our nation.
We do.
We have, and in terms of linking it back to the new entrant, we have a 2-acre veg plot on our farm, and now that's feeding 40 families. And yes, that's only 40 families, but imagine if every farm had one, or if every community had one, and that's direct access. And then as consumers, we need to be asking ourselves what we want to eat and take responsibility for what we're buying.
Do you think, remember I asked you about 10 years' time, do you think diets are changing and therefore the ultimate market is changing?
Well, presumably the NHS will be broke in 10 years' time. Broken and broke. So we will have had the conversation about diets at some point because it's all interlinked. It's an externality. It's what we came back to about cross-party, cross-department conversations. But we won't be able to run the NHS if we carry on with the diet-related diseases increase that we've seen in the last 5 years. So it's only ever going to get worse until we do something about it.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you. Thinking about resilience in terms of climate and measurement and all of those kind of things, what do you think the role is of research moving forward? Do you think we have the research and it's about using it really effectively, or do you think we do need more research moving forward?
Thank you.
Well, it's ongoing. I don't think we should stop if that's what you mean. I think we've got to. We know how far we've come even in the last 10 years in terms of the research that we've seen. I think some of what I was talking about in terms of measurement is using what we've got already, whether it's, we talked about satellite imagery, LiDAR imagery, the idea of modeling for soil carbon, the idea of how we and then we sense, we ground truth that by doing sampling over a certain area. But at some stage, we'll get to a stage where we won't even need to do that, I think. So we need much more research into what we're doing in terms of being able to measure soil health without actually having to take soil core samples. That's just one example, but that's why I think research has to continue. It's really important.
Yeah, Harry.
I was just going to make the observation that we've sort of had 80 years of sort of a farming paradigm which has been really supported by research and cutting-edge science and understanding. The world we're talking about is a sort of pretty nascent thing, and therefore we need our best brains on how we navigate to the future. So absolutely there's a need for research because there's still a whole load of unanswered questions about how we get there.
Agreed with that.
I totally agree that there is a need for research, but I think, and it might not answer your question, but we need action now. I don't want to wait for evidence. I know what I'm doing is delivering results. I don't need an evidence research base to choose whether to continue that or not. As a farmer, I'm completely linked to my land. So yes, we need research, but we need closer links with farmers, and recognizing the farmer voice is just as important as peer-reviewed papers.
One last question. I can see a hand here.
Hi. So we've been talking about funding. I'm just wondering where the money's coming from. Is this coming from the taxpayer? Are we paying for this? Or is there any interest in some form of wealth tax on big business, caps on salaries in food industry, supermarkets, and therefore the funding could come from there? I wondered what your thoughts were on that. But I also want to slightly share this question with Guy, because there was also something about the land use and being top-down dictating. Is there something in the community? And you had something to say about it in France.
Go on, Guy.
Is that all right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Quickly.
Yeah, just the question from the back about new entrants. I also farm in France, where land of better quality than I farm in Devon is 1/10 of the price. And the reason it's 1/10 of the price is because there's quite a lot of hoops you have to jump through in legislation. I had to be audited as being suitable to farm that land, and now that I'm passing it on to my employees there, they also have to be. And that just puts off all these traders. And for the first few years, I found it really difficult, but actually after 12 years, I've come to appreciate that I actually do welcome the intervention, which would probably be in contravention of the lady over here who didn't want someone driving up her road and telling her how to farm. But there are contradictions there, and quite frankly, I favour the French system.
Okay, that's a really interesting counter to that discussion we had right at the beginning. But your question was about funding. Where's the money going to come from? Is it all going to come from the taxpayer? Yeah. Is it all going to come from the taxpayer? You've said you want more.
Well, it comes from the taxpayer anyway, because the externalities are paid for by the taxpayer, whether it's the NHS, whether it's EA, whether it's cleaning out our waterways, whether it's dealing with flooding, whether it's dealing with obesity. That we're paying for it now. What I'm talking about is redistribution, is basically taking that money and using it to basically solve the problems, and rather than having to deal with the issues. Then it's basically prevention, or it's prevention rather than cure.
Okay. So it is all coming from the taxpayer, but it's a good deal. Yeah. Anyone think differently?
It's all coming from the taxpayer. Yes, there's private. We've talked about other private ways of getting money from the water companies or from various carbon credits and so on and so forth. An element I think will always have to come from tax. How that's funded, that's a political choice which we need to make as a country, where the money comes from and how it's in addition to your point, how it's raised. I don't think there's time probably now for a big debate on how we do that.
No.
But
Steve squared, I'd put it right back at you. That is your dilemma to square.
Thanks very much. Thanks for your help. Right, listen, we're out of time. That's been for me, that's been a really interesting debate. And thank you so much for all those really good questions, because you kind of added to what the panel had originally said they wanted in that first 100 days. And you added in things like the land use framework. Is it too top down? Do we do it collaboratively? Actually, it's a good thing, as Guy was kind of positing at the end. We talked about multifunctionality in the future and the role of new tech in that. We talked about health and the need to kind of join up our thinking around the food system and around diet. And we like Henry Dimbleby's food strategy, so go back to that. We talked about new entrants, and that feels like a really kind of pressing concern as well. We talked about trade. We talked about more fruit and veg in the future. And we talked about resilience in the face of kind of what's coming down the tracks in terms of climate change. So a really good conversation. And as a minister, I think I'm taking you seriously. Yeah, thank you.